Hello everybody, and welcome to the Sovereign Village Project. I want to talk today about permaculture and poverty, about trying to apply the permaculture principles and build a life and homestead based on them with very little income and financial capital. And I kind of have like 2 points about that I want to make. One is which I think you will be far better at permaculture and you will build a more resilient and self-sufficient homestead and a more sustainable homestead and lifestyle, approaching it from a low-income perspective. For example, if you're like really poverty-stricken, you're gonna use the edges and you're gonna use the marginal, you're gonna produce no waste, and you're definitely gonna use slow and small solutions because that's all that's gonna be available to you. And as you build wealth, you can bring those concepts along with you and those practices along with you. And that's my second point, is that you will build wealth. I believe that the permaculture lifestyle and following those principles and understanding the 8 forms of capital will make you a wealthy person. There are a lot of political forces that really use poverty. They try to make you identify with a class. They want you to be in a tribe, in a class, so they can better control you. So they make you feel like you are a poor person, that that's your identity, and it's not. Nobody is stuck being poor, not in America, and really not anywhere in the world. Unless you are being really, like, if you have a feudal serf lord that rides through the horse and takes all of your grain, you're still going to be, you might be poor then permanently. But even then, a lot of people found ways to get wealthy in medieval times. And as we go into these very totalitarian times, we will have to be more creative about hiding and keeping our wealth. But there's always a way to do it. And there's always a way to move forward and build real, true, lasting wealth. So just know that poverty is not a permanent state of being, and that's coming from a person who's really been poor all their lives. I've never even had health insurance. I grew up in a kind of a poor mountain family, really living on the edges and well under the federal poverty line most of my life. And then I went right into music after that, and right as I was starting to kind of get into a good financial position, the tyrannical lockdowns closed most of my living down. About 95% of my income went away. But because I was already practicing permaculture, it enabled me to weather that storm and not go into debt and not lose my home or my property and not have to get a job that I didn't like. And so I know a lot of us are really coming into permaculture and homesteading from a position of poverty, and that's who I want to speak to a lot with this channel. I'm standing right here in front of my first homestead. This is 1.2 acres with an old single-wide trailer, and when I got it, it was a mess. I'd never even thought that I could own land on a musician's salary, but I'd been really scraping my money together, and when that came up for sale, it was an incredible deal because that whole property was just covered in trash. It was in abysmal condition. It had a lot of drug use history, and it was about the worst property you could imagine. But I could afford it, and I could see the vision under it. And it was a beautiful property underneath all of it. Just forest everywhere, and a good south-facing slope. And while it still looks a little bit rough on the outside, the folks that are in there now are doing amazing things. The fellow who owns it now is a carpenter, and he's got the interior just beautiful at this point, and he's about to tackle the exterior. So in a couple of months I'll talk to him, and we'll probably show you what that looks like, because it's really exciting to see somebody continuing that project. But it was there that I started my permaculture journey. When I first bought the homestead, I didn't know what I was doing. I had never heard of permaculture. I just knew I needed to grow food because I was so broke. I was just throwing plants in the ground and trying to look at where the sun was and putting fruit trees in very nonsensical places. But it was there that I learned about permaculture, and when I started to apply those principles to my life, I did start to crawl out of that hole a lot. I got out of debt, and I started to save wealth, and I learned about how to build real wealth outside of fiat currency, and that's been the biggest change in my life, has been building real wealth in terms of connections. And well, I'll do another video about the 8 forms of capital one of these days, because I think it's a really useful thing to know right now. But I kind of wanted to also take you around my property and show you how I've applied solutions that really fit within the permaculture principles, but really most of it was kind of just by default because I was working without money. Like, when it comes to producing no waste, almost everything is just built out of whatever I have lying around. This is just an old piece of fencing. And when it comes to compost and stuff, it's really easy to think of that mindset of producing no waste. I use everything I can find, sticks, pieces of grass, every bit of organic matter I can get my hands on definitely turns into either mulch or compost. When it came to building beds, the internet is full of all these great ideas about building beds and using cedar, but I simply couldn't access that budget-wise, so I just used logs. And what I find is logs are great. They rot down and they provide a rich source of nutrients, and the worms and the other insects just absolutely love these things. And so using logs has been a better solution probably than a lot of bed solutions like using cinder blocks or things like that. And everything on this property that can be used or turned into something, that's what happens. This stump, I don't see a stump. I see a little garden bed. I'm just throwing mulch in there now. I'm going to let it compost down there, and I'll find something fun to plant in it. when it came to building my rainwater collection. This is a system that's constantly improving, but I was so broke I didn't even have money for the PVC and the things to really make the connections to do it right, and I don't have a gutter on this house yet. So I just left open barrels. Of course that creates a problem, but that's what permaculture is all about. The problem is mosquitoes, so you can't see it, but underneath the ice, doing just fine, there's some goldfish down there, and they do a great job of keeping these mosquitoes down for me. And of course, you can change these systems as you go. Nothing is permanent, nothing is static. I can really prioritize things later. I know I'll have more revenue coming in, and I can lay out and budget out the different projects. It's easy to get discouraged sometimes as you listen to Bill Mollison and other permaculture guys talking about these dam projects and swales and bringing in earth movers, and you're just despairing because you're like, I can't, there's no way I can afford that. But that's just one of the design criteria. Your budget is just one of the design criteria to work around. Don't stress about it. Your budget is what it is. Just be frugal and use as much money as you can for those projects, but don't stress about the design criteria. It's just like he talks about onerous regulation can really be a problem with trying to develop a homestead, but he says embrace it, because that's just helping you define the criteria and to really narrow down what the options are for your homestead. It really just helps you with your design. And some more things around the homestead. When I had to build a trellis, I kind of ignored all the great internet ideas because they all required financial capital. I just used sticks, and that's way more natural. That's better. I'm using what's around me. I'm not having to go use fossil fuels to go pick up 2x4s and things like that. And that's really a theme that runs throughout this entire homestead. Everything is really brought from nature, and it's kind of a running theme, and it makes for a really neat aesthetic when everything on the property is just made from logs and sticks, and there's very little man-made materials. Here we've got a bunch of seeds I'm starting. I never throw away a cup, I never throw away a container. Everything gets used. And I'm so frugal, like today, there was a little bit of water left from making my coffee in the French press. And that little bit of water, because it's spring water that I gather by hand, that got used in the plants because I don't want to use chlorinated water, which should not be in the human body or plants. I really don't buy planters. And I will sell things in planters like this too. I'm not even worried about that. I don't care about aesthetics. If people want pretty plants, they can go to Walmart. In fact, I think this one I just about caused an accident on the interstate, slamming on my brakes because I saw a bunch of pots lying on the ground. And as you kind of practice this kind of way of doing permaculture and this frugality, people get to know you, and they know that you are out looking, and people appreciate it. People get excited about that. I mean, people really just like generally what you're doing. I mean, you'll always find people that don't like permaculture, weirdos, but in general, people get excited about homesteaders, especially young people I've found doing it. And so my neighbors do things for me. They help me get what I need. Like here, they brought me over trees, Christmas trees. And they know I'll either compost them or I'll use the wood inside for a fence post or something like that. And that's like a really great blessing, and it just comes from people knowing what I'm doing. Over here is a kind of really redneck solution I've had to do. I couldn't get the greenhouse done in time, and there's a whole bunch of plants that need done. They needed protected from the cold, and so I just put windows underneath the porch, and the heat from the house on the south side has been really keeping all of those plants alive until I can get the greenhouse up. And the greenhouse will be a fun example of all of this, which I'll show you as I do, because I'm using windows I got mostly from that property over there and cedar poles off the property. The only thing I'll really buy is the roofing for it, which will be not very expensive at all. So don't get discouraged if you're approaching this from a position of not a lot of money. I think it's actually the best thing that can happen to you. And Holly's demanding my attention now, so I'm going to sign off, everybody. Happy homesteading. Enjoy the permaculture journey. Stay safe and be well.